Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from 10th Canto, Chapter 1, Text 2. Yadoscha dharma shil Yadoscha dharma shilasya Nitaram muni sattama Tatrangsen aiva tirnasya Vishnur viryani samsasna. Yado, of Yadu or the Yadu dynasty. Cha, also. Dharmashilasya, who were strictly attached to religious principles. Nitaram, highly qualified. Muni Sattama, O best of all Munis, King of the Munis, Sukadev Goswami. Tatra, in that dynasty. Angshena, with his plenary expansion Baladev. Avatirnasya, who appeared as an incarnation. Vishnu, of Lord Vishnu. Viryani, the glorious activities. Sangsa, kindly describe. Naha, unto us. Translation. O best of Munis, you have also described the descendants of Yadu, who were very pious and strictly adherent to religious principles. Now, if you will, kindly describe the wonderful, glorious activities of Lord Vishnu or Krishna, who appeared in that Yadu dynasty with Baladev, his plenary expansion. Purport. The Brahma Samhita 5.1 explains that Krishna is the origin of the Vishnu Tattva. Ishvaraha Parama Krishna Sachirananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme controller. He has an eternal blissful spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, for he is the prime cause of all causes. Then in Brahma Samhita 5.48, Yasyaika nishva sita kalam athavalambya jivanti loma vilaja jagatanda nataha Vishnur mahansa iha yasya kala vishesho govindam aripurusham tamaham bhajami. The Brahmas, the heads of the innumerable universes, live only for the duration of one breath of Mahavishnu. I worship Govinda, the original Lord, of whom Mahavishnu is but a portion of a plenary portion. Brahma Samhita 5.48. Govinda Krishna is the original personality of Godhead. Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. Even Lord Mahavishnu, who by his breathing creates many millions upon millions of universes, is Lord Krishna's Kala Vishesh, or plenary portion of a plenary portion. Mahavishnu is a plenary expansion of Shankarshan, who is a plenary expansion of Narayan. Narayan is a plenary expansion of the Chaturvyuha, and the Chaturvyuha are plenary expansions of Baladev, the first manifestation of Krishna. Therefore, when Krishna appeared with Baladev, all the Vishnu Tattvas appeared with him. Maharaj Parikshit requested Sukadev Goswami to describe Krishna and his glorious activities. Another meaning may be derived from this verse as follows. Although Sukadev Goswami was the greatest Muni, he could describe Krishna only partially, Ankshena, for no one can describe Krishna fully. It is said that Anantadev has thousands of heads, but although he tries to describe Krishna with thousands of tongues, his descriptions are still incomplete. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutle Shrimati Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Om Jnanatimurandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So now we're beginning the 10th canto. When Srila Prabhupada wrote the Krishna book, he prefaced it with one verse. That was the 4th verse from this first chapter of 10th canto. Parikshit Maharaj is speaking here in this chapter, the first 13 verses. He's describing to Sukadeva Goswami his thirst, his eagerness to hear about Krishna's pastimes, along with Balaram, because they come together. He also describes a little bit why he's so anxious to hear about all of the questions that he asked, the answers, plus whatever he hasn't asked, he asked Sukadeva Goswami to answer. He explains that his grandfathers are Arjun, along with all the Pandavas. They were able to conquer all of the great Timangala fish in the battle of Kurukshetra simply by taking shelter of Krishna. Now that's one side of Parikshit Maharaj's family, the Pandavas. The other side comes from Kunti Devi, because Kunti Devi, Devaki, she gave birth to 8 sons. The first 6 were killed. The last 2, 7th and 8th, were Krishna and Balaram. Along with those 8 sons, she had one daughter, and that was Subhadra. And Subhadra married Arjun. So in another sense, Krishna and Balaram are also like the grandfathers of Parikshit Maharaj. Parikshit Maharaj was remembering to Sukadeva Goswami that when Parikshit was just in the womb, his mother took shelter of Krishna. And Krishna, who was in her heart, the heart and womb are very close, with his Sudarshan chakra, he protected Parikshit Maharaj, who was the last descendant of both the Kuru and the Pandava dynasties. So he has so much affection for Krishna. Now it's about the 5th day that he's been fasting from water and food. And he explains to Sukadeva Goswami that despite this intense thirst and hunger, simply by hearing about Krishna, all of my thirst is eradicated. I'm drinking the nectar of Krishna's pastimes. And when Sutta Goswami, because the 14th verse, that's the dividing point in this chapter, there's 69 verses. Sutta Goswami explains to Sonaka that after Maharaj Parikshit asked these 13 verses of questions and explained his eagerness to hear about Krishna, then in the 15th verse, Sukadeva Goswami begins speaking, first appreciating and congratulating Parikshit Maharaj for his eagerness to hear about Krishna. And in this chapter he explains about how Bhumi Devi, Brahma, and the demigods went to see Vishnu, how the Lord descended, how Kamsa, he killed on the advice of Narada Muni, because Narada Muni wanted to speed up the pastimes of Krishna. He killed the first 6 sons of Devaki, and he was just waiting for this 8th son to appear. He decided to very severely, to give so much distress to the Yadu dynasty, because from his previous birth he learned from Narada Muni he was Kalanimi, and therefore he had a great aversion to the demigods who Narada Muni explained would be taking birth in the Yadu, Vrishni, and Andeka dynasties. So this chapter is the prelude to Sukadeva Goswami's description of the beautiful pastimes that we'll be hearing in the 10th canto. And this 4th verse describes that this is the nectar for which we are all aspiring for. And anyone who's not attracted to hearing about Krishna's pastimes is no better than a killer of the soul or a butcher. So Prabhupada, he gives this first chapter, the first 15 verses, in his Introduction to Krishna book. Now, today being a very special day because we're proceeding in the 10th canto, also today marks the 54th anniversary of the incorporation of Iskcon. Now, when we hear about Iskcon's incorporation, we have to understand why Srila Prabhupada took the trouble to go to America and incorporate Iskcon. This begins, of course, with Lord Krishna himself. Why did Krishna arrange for Parikshit Maharaj to be cursed and die within 7 days? Because when Krishna left the planet, Kali Yuga immediately started. And in Kali Yuga, the only panacea for suffering is to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam. So by the arrangement of Krishna, Parikshit Maharaj, he was able to inquire from Sukadeva Goswami, and Sukadeva Goswami spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in this Kali Yuga, as the golden avatar, he predicted that the chanting of his names, because he's none different from Krishna, would be spread all over the world in every town and village. So from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's prediction, after some generations, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur appeared, he took up this prediction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu very seriously. And being anglicized in a very high position at that time in colonial British India, he decided to use his wisdom, his knowledge of English, and begin preaching in the English language. He also predicted, because in his lifetime he wasn't able to leave India, but he predicted that a great Senapati would appear who would fulfill this prediction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His son, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he carried forward his father's predictions and his hard work to spread the names of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in every town and village by sending some first disciples out of India. He sent them to Burma, he sent them to England, he sent them to Germany. But primarily they were unsuccessful in their preaching endeavors. Then as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was preparing to leave his body in 1936, 2 weeks before he gave up his body, our Srila Prabhupada wrote to him asking for, he's explaining, I have no qualification, I'm just a grihastha, I'm not one of your sannyasis, but please tell me what can I do for you. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati repeated the same instructions he gave him in 1922. You tried to preach in the English language. This will be good for the whole world, also good for you. So from 1936, Prabhupada took that final instruction as his life and soul. In 1944, he started the Back to Godhead magazine. And by 1953, he had accepted Vanaprastha. He had gone to preach because of his traveling in northern India. He had come in contact with many educated doctors and teachers, professors, and he was invited to set up a center in Jhansi. There in Jhansi, he began the League of Devotees. Now this League of Devotees is the precursor to our present-day Iskcon. Within the prospectus of League of Devotees, Prabhupada gave the major points that he would carry forward in his incorporation of Iskcon in 1966. Though he was unsuccessful in Jhansi, that was also by the arrangement of the Lord, he came to Mathura, he finally accepted sannyas, then he came to Vrindavan. He began to write to prepare for his fulfillment of his spiritual master's instructions. After completing 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam, by the arrangement of the Lord, he was able to get a free ticket, and he arrived in America September 1965. From September to November of 65, Prabhupada was in Pennsylvania. He was doing all he could to preach at different centers there, at churches, YMCAs, but he realized that in the small town of Butler, Pennsylvania, he wasn't going to accomplish much. He was shooting for the rhinoceros. He wanted to go to New York. So one day he took a bus, he went to Philadelphia, spoke to, at the University of Pennsylvania, a professor there, distributed his books, and then went on 2 hours later to New York. In New York, he only had one friend, one person he knew, Dr. Rama Murthy Mishra, who was a Mayavadi yoga teacher. So Dr. Mishra gave him a place to stay. He had on the 5th floor of a big building, he had a yoga studio. Attached to that yoga studio was a little room with no windows and an attached bathroom. He gave that office room to Prabhupada. Prabhupada had to walk. He stayed there from November to February of 1965. He had to walk every day about 5 blocks in the freezing cold of New York. Cold you can't imagine. He only had white rubber Indian bathroom shoes that he wore. Dr. Mishra gave him a coat. We still had that coat in the New York temple. Prabhupada gave it to Jayadvaita, and Jayadvaita used to wear it all the time, a tweed coat. That was all Prabhupada had to protect him from the cold. So Dr. Mishra would allow Prabhupada to give kirtans, but wouldn't allow him to lecture, because Prabhupada would speak about Krishna Bhakti. And that would confuse his students who were learning about how to merge into the effulgence of Krishna. So Prabhupada wanted to start his own lectures. In November to February, he was with Dr. Mishra. Then in February, he rented his own office on the 3rd floor of the same building on 72nd Street. If you ever go to New York, when you go uptown, the buildings are so high you can't even see the sky when you're walking on the ground. And there's constant traffic, unending noise, 24 hours a day of the cars going. Not now. Well, also Krishna's mercy. So somehow or other, from February to April, Prabhupada began his preaching there. He would have his Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday classes in Bhagavad-Gita. And from Dr. Mishra's students, people would come and listen to him about Krishna Bhakti. Some of them were interested, and some of them wanted to help Prabhupada in his mission. One day, Prabhupada came back to his room, and his typewriter and his tape recorder had both been stolen. Fortunately, whoever stole it didn't steal all of his typewritten papers, so his manuscripts were still there. At that time, one of his students named Paul explained to Prabhupada that I live in a big loft. Now in lower New York, because New York is a huge city, it's like Delhi, unending different mohallas and suburbs, and just sprawling this way and that way like an octopus. So in the lower portion of New York, in Manhattan, there used to be a lot of factories with sweatshops. Sweatshops are where very poor people go to work. And they would work in these lofts, in these sweatshops. And then as industrialization started, they didn't need the sweatshops anymore. So these huge lofts, as big as this whole temple room, were empty. And they were called AIR lofts, artists in residence. So the youth who were, they were magnetized to this Lower East Side, because this was on the west side there was Haight-Ashbury, on the east side of America there was the Village and this Lower East Side. So all the artists, the hippies, the counterculture people, They were looking for cheap rent, and these lofts were just perfect. They could do whatever they wanted, make whatever noise they wanted. Nobody cared. It was just poor people and immigrants and these counterculture people living there. So Paul offered, you come and live with me. Just minimal amount. Prabhupada was paying like $1 a day to live with him. So in the end of April, Prabhupada moved there. He vacated from 72nd Street and moved there. From the beginning of May, as soon as Prabhupada got there, he started getting a big gathering. Big means 12 people, 18 people. And the younger people, they were becoming interested in Prabhupada. And of course, the younger people, they had their own media. They didn't read the New York Times and the Times of India, things like that. They had their own newspapers. The most famous newspaper amongst the counterculture there was called the Village Voice. So one reporter from the Village Voice one day came in May to meet Prabhupada, to interview him. He went up to the loft, which was on the 4th floor, and he walked in. He saw there were shoes that lined up. He thought maybe he should take off his shoes. And there were all these young people sitting, and they were sitting in the lotus position, facing the walls, not looking at each other, and everybody was doing something different. So the reporter was trying to figure out what was going on in this room, huge room with all these people sitting, dressed in what they thought was Indian clothes, some chanting mantras, some howling, everyone doing something different. So the man, he didn't take off his shoes. He started walking around, seeing if anyone would notice him. He walks to the back of the loft and he sees a curtain. He opens up the curtain and he sees Srila Prabhupada sitting there. And he asked to sit down. He says, first I should take off my shoes. Prabhupada says, no one, who said you should take off your shoes? No one said you have to take off your shoes. Sit down, be comfortable. So Prabhupada made everything very nice for him. And the man asked Prabhupada, what are these people doing? And Prabhupada said, I have no idea what they're doing. I'm trying to teach them, but they're misunderstanding me. They're very confused. So this reporter, he just fell in love with Prabhupada. And from what he wrote, more and more people started coming to hear from Prabhupada. So from May 9th, Prabhupada, one of these people was a young professor. He was half white, half black, named Carl Jurgens. And he was linked up with Allen Ginsberg, Timothy Leary, who was the founder of LSD. Some people say that Carl Jurgens actually made the formula for LSD. So Carl Jurgens, he was interested in Prabhupada's classes. And Prabhupada asked him, he gave him this prospectus of League of Devotees and says, I want to incorporate here in America the same thing. So they started having meetings on the 9th, on the 12th, on the 15th. And Carl, he already had a lawyer, he knew his whole way around New York. He called his lawyer from Park Avenue. That's where all the big lawyers have their offices. And his name was Stephen Goldsmith. He was a Jewish lawyer. He had a wife and 2 kids, typical mainstream. And he was very interested in helping Prabhupada incorporate his society. So they had meetings. Prabhupada wrote in his diary that this incorporation is going to cost me $300. $100 for the incorporation and $200 for the lawyer. So one night while Prabhupada was lecturing, he would pass around a basket, and in that basket they would put 50 cents, $1, $2. One night there was a $100 bill in there. Carl had put that in there to help with the registration fees for the lawyer. So then they started meeting. How many trustees would they need? What the different points would be in the incorporation. And Prabhupada just took that from his League of Devotees. I won't read all those details now because there's not much time. But tonight for 1 hour, we're going to have a whole history of how Prabhupada set all this up. and we can read all of the 7 points and how Prabhupada inaugurated those 7 points into Iskcon. So Prabhupada, he decided that the name of this particular incorporated society would be the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And there were going to be either 9 or 11 trustees. They had to have 9 trustees. For 3 years, first 3 trustees, then second year 3 trustees, then the third year 3 trustees. So the first year, he chose Michael Grant and his girlfriend Jan. Now, Michael Grant was later to become, 2 months later, he would be Mukunda Das. And Jan would become Janaki in the first initiations. And then there was another sympathizer named James Green. So they were the first to be trustees. One morning, because Mukunda, or Michael, he was a jazz musician. Jazz musicians, they do their music at night. And he was doing his music in another part of New York called Staten Island. You have to take a boat to get there, it's an island. So you'd have to go there, and 5 o'clock in the morning, he'd come back to his house. So one morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, they come, and Prabhupada is very upset. He says, this Paul, he's gone crazy. He's insulted me so much. He left soap on the shower floor. And I asked him, don't leave the soap on the shower floor, it's dangerous. You can slip. I'm an old man. And he started abusing me and cursing at me. I can't live with him anymore. So Michael didn't know, he had just gotten home from his music. He said, how can I help you? Do you want a new place? And yes, he needed a new place. And he needed a place to stay in the interim. So this was the end of May. The last 10 days, 2 weeks of May, Prabhupada was in flux. He just had one little suitcase that he ran out of the apartment with because Paul had become mad and he was afraid Paul was going to attack him. So he stayed at Carl's apartment, his loft, and Mukunda, Michael, he went looking for apartments. And he found just a few blocks away a very nice storefront at 26 2nd Avenue. And the rate was nice. It was $125 a month. And behind it was a two-room apartment with a kitchen and a bathroom. That was only $75 a month. So on a fixed day, just before June, Prabhupada and Carl and Michael met the landlord, and they made a deal. And Prabhupada was able to talk him down, of course, being a great sadhu from India. But Mr. Gardner, the landlord, he was able to talk him up afterwards with utilities and gas and so many things, extra things you need when you live in the city. So Prabhupada very happily moved in there. And on June 1st, what is it, July now? So July 1st, Prabhupada moved into 26 2nd Avenue. And by that time, Stephen Goldsmith had the papers all in order. He had submitted them. And first he put a sign up at the Bowery that for 15 days this was going to be the center, the world center of Iskcon. And then later, they made 26 2nd Avenue the world headquarters of Iskcon. So one night, after Stephen Goldsmith showed all the papers to Prabhupada, it was about half a dozen pieces of long paper, all properly typed with legal terms. He knew how to do all of this. He showed it to Prabhupada on the 11th, and then on the 13th, he came to 26 2nd Avenue and sat in the back of the temple. Well, it wasn't a temple, it was just a center, Prabhupada called it, because there were no deities. He sat in the back where the shoes were, very intently listening to Prabhupada's lecture. So Prabhupada was speaking about how nefarious people take the teachings of Bhagavad-Gita and misconstrue them. And he saw Mr. Goldsmith sitting there. And he said, our president here, Mr. Stephen Goldsmith, he can tell you how you can take a simple thing and turn it upside down legally. And he gave the example of in Calcutta, the government made a rent tax. And one lawyer, one advocate, he was able to completely manipulate that tax so that the government had to throw the law out and make a whole new tax. So Prabhupada said that's what these people do to the Bhagavad-Gita. They take Krishna's words and they interpret them in such a way that it's all upside down. So we don't do that with Krishna's words. We take Krishna's words and just present them exactly as it is. So then he introduced Stephen Goldsmith, and he said, Mr. Goldsmith has something to announce. You please speak. So Mr. Goldsmith, he rose, and he explained that I need these signatories on this Incorporation of Iskcon. So the favorable people whose names were on there who were previously informed, without even reading the papers, they all came and signed it. They were all sympathizers of Srila Prabhupada and what he was doing. At that time he was Swamiji. But none of them had committed themselves. So this was July. Also during this month in July, this was the 13th of July. And then with that stamp of approval and all the signatures, Prabhupada was able to get the Incorporation of Iskcon. Now also in that month, because of the 7 different, I can read some of them, the words are technical because they're written by a lawyer. But in Prabhupada's terms, we can understand them in the jargon of Iskcon. So, the first of these that Prabhupada wrote was, where did it go? This is just what I was afraid of. I wouldn't be able to find it. Now, we won't understand the jargon, but we will understand how Prabhupada implemented it. Yes. To systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and to educate all peoples in the techniques of spiritual life in order to check the imbalance of values in life and to achieve real unity and peace in the world. Now, how does that translate so that we can understand it? We must preach Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada was always describing how we must preach. And not only did Prabhupada preach, but Lord Krishna himself preached to Arjuna. He spoke the Bhagavad-Gita. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he traveled all over India by foot, spreading the holy name, preaching the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, turning thousands of people into devotees. The other example is Lord Buddha, he also preached. And Jesus Christ, he also preached. So this word preaching, it might have a negative connotation in English, because nowadays preaching means you're trying to force upon someone your beliefs. Nowadays they use the word outreach instead of preaching. But Prabhupada used that word preaching. We must preach Krishna consciousness, and we must help people understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada gave several points, how Krishna is the Supreme Lord, how we are all equal in quality to him, how we want to set up natural and simple living, and to how we want to set up places of pilgrimage. So when the trustees heard that Prabhupada wanted to set up a place of pilgrimage, they looked around at 26 Second Avenue and they thought, well, is this a place of pilgrimage? For Prabhupada it was, because at that first seed of Iskcon, at 26 Second Avenue, Prabhupada was able to preach Krishna consciousness and attract enough people and then send those people all over the world to incorporate other centers of Iskcon. So things work differently in America and in India. In America, everything is decentralized. The First Amendment in the Constitution of America is that every individual in America has freedom of religion. They can either practice religion of their choice or no religion at all. And there's a wall between the government and the practice of religion. The government should have nothing to do with religion. So this incorporation was actually so that Prabhupada could get what's called 501c, tax exemption. So then the trustees were thinking, well, 501c, to get tax exemption, the only person who has money in this room is Stephen Goldsmith. And he's taking the money from Prabhupada. So why does Prabhupada need this incorporation? But Prabhupada, his vision was so far-reaching. He understood that in order to make a society, you need a foundation. And this incorporation was the foundation of Iskcon. And with that one original incorporation, he sent his disciples to Los Angeles, to Montreal, to Boston, to Santa Fe, all over America, and eventually to India. And those same 7 points that Prabhupada gave in that original incorporation, they were able to make incorporations and start temples in all the cities of the world. Now finally, in 1970, when Prabhupada came back to India, India works differently. There's a charity commission here. So when you incorporate a society here, and you want to, it's for nonprofit, and you want to get tax exemption in the donations, you have to go to Bombay. Bombay is the charity commission. And there you have to register your charity corporation, your charity, with the charity commission. And from that Bombay central office, you can make unlimited branches in India. But there's only one office. So all of the centers in Iskcon, to this day, everything is connected to our main central office in Bombay. So Prabhupada called Bombay his office. He did the exact same incorporation, but according to Indian style. This is 1971, when he made the charity trust for Iskcon here. And he had the different trustees, same, according to the laws of the land, he did that. So in that way, Prabhupada was able to establish this foundation of Iskcon all over the world. Now 7 years later, it was 1973. By that time, there must have been at least 80 temples around the world. Prabhupada had a very good foundation. And Mukunda, he was already initiated, of course, 2 months after signing the incorporation. He and Johnny got initiated. And that same month, in July, in August, Prabhupada had the first initiations. He got the first mimeograph machines to start publishing. And on June 12th, we should also celebrate this. June 12th, Prabhupada had his first Sunday Love Feast. This is when Prabhupada was still in the loft. And 16 people came. He made 12 preparations. And he said, this is all by the grace of Lord Chaitanya. I've now started this Sunday Love Feast. So from that time on, Prabhupada had the Sunday Love Feast. So 1977, 7 years after, Mukunda saw how wise Prabhupada was to make this incorporation. Because from this, Iskcon was able to bloom all over the world. Then the 10th year of the incorporation, that was 1976, Prabhupada was again in New York for the grandest Rath Yatra of all of Iskcon. It was the Rath Yatra down Fifth Avenue. Prabhupada said Fifth Avenue was the most important street in the most important city in the most important country of the world. So when we had that Fifth Avenue Rath Yatra, it was just exactly 10 years after Prabhupada incorporated Iskcon. And that was the pinnacle of Prabhupada's success for his New York preaching. From a small little 26 Avenue, now they were having 3 carts roll down about 50 blocks. Was it 52nd Street it starts? down to 8th, is about 50 blocks. Thousands and thousands of people attending. So this was the proof. Prabhupada, in his lecture at that time, he said that this Iskcon is like Varahadev. Varahadev, he came out from the nostril of Lord Brahma, and he immediately began to expand to universal size. So our Iskcon is also like that. We started at 26 2nd Avenue, and now we've expanded to the point we're all over the world. Yes, so what Prabhupada said on that 7th year was, he was with the devotees, and he was telling them that when my Guru Maharaj told me to preach in the West, I was a grihastha. I had no qualification whatsoever, but I was just thinking, let me try. And when Prabhupada said, let me try, all the devotees started to cheer, because had Prabhupada not tried, none of us would be sitting here today. There would be no Iskcon. So then after the 10th anniversary, the next big anniversary was the 25th anniversary. That 25th anniversary was 1991. Prabhupada had already left. And what they did was they purchased 26 2nd Avenue, and they had a Maha Sankirtan from the temple in Brooklyn across the Brooklyn Bridge. Were you there? Were you present? Buffalo. They walked, it took hours. They walked, hundreds of devotees, across the bridge to 26 2nd Avenue, and had a huge festival there. Because now after 25 years, Iskcon had become established. It was a household word, Hare Krishna. Now we'll go back to 1977, when Prabhupada was here in Vrindavan. And he was very sick, and he was in his room, and the devotees were sitting around him. And he explained to the devotees there, he said, I've given you this huge movement. You please maintain it. Please do not destroy it. Please cooperate. And after he said that, Prabhupada started to cry. And when Prabhupada started to cry, all the devotees there in the room also started to cry. And the devotee who was giving this memory of that moment, he said, within Iskcon, we have the good, we have the bad, we have the ugly. But we should never leave Iskcon. Because if we leave Iskcon, Prabhupada's crying. So we have to stay within Iskcon. We have to push forward this society that Prabhupada established, incorporated. And we should never do anything that would make Prabhupada cry. So then after the 25th of this incorporation, 25th year, the next big celebration was 2016. And that was the Golden Jubilee that most of us have taken part in. We were supposed to open the TOVP at that time, but it still wasn't ready, of course. Now they've pushed forward to 2022, 2023.
22, might go to 30
might go to 30, right. But at that time, they brought 108, from 108 countries, they brought the devotees, and they had a Maha Sankirtan. All the devotees were holding flags from their countries. This is in Calcutta, right? It was just absolutely fantastic. The display of how by Lord Krishna's desire, Lord Chaitanya's desire, the desire of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the desire of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and finally, the Senapati Srila Prabhupada, who took these teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu all over the world and made Hare Krishna famous. We saw 108 countries, all the devotees converged together with their flags, you were there, right? How they were all chanting Hare Krishna together, thousands of devotees. So we're all minuscule parts of that ocean of Iskcon. And this wonderful day, this incorporation day, we have to remember, just like Prabhupada said, let me try. In 1965, before Prabhupada had any followers whatsoever, he would wander in Manhattan just walking. And he was sitting on a bench one day. And a bus conductor happened to sit next to him. You know, you just make friends while you're sitting in the park. And Prabhupada, he told this bus conductor, he said, there's so many temples, there's so many devotees, but only time is separating us. So now that time has come. We have how many temples now? Over 700 temples, farm projects, books in 86 languages. Everything has expanded and is still expanding. It's not that there's any limit. It's just like when Prabhupada gave this name of Iskcon, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He said not God consciousness, God is vague. Krishna consciousness Prabhupada took from a stanza in Srila Rupa Goswami's Padyavali. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita. That means one who is always absorbed in the mellow of devotion to Krishna. So this was how Prabhupada translated this, Krishna consciousness. In Hindi it's a little closer, Antarashtriya Shri Krishna Bhavanamrit Sang. So that Krishna or Bhavanamrit, they're both there. So this Krishna consciousness movement, when you're in a forest, you can't see the whole forest because there's so many trees. So we're in Iskcon. But if we see the magnitude of how Iskcon has become so successfully spread all over the world, Prabhupada decided to start in America, in the greatest city of America, he considered New York City, in the Lower East Side, where the youth were congregating. And from that small beginning, on this day, when he incorporated the society, we're all fortunately sitting here today in the beautiful Krishna Balaram temple, from whom Iskcon and everything is emanating. Hare Krishna. Any questions? Good.
You mentioned the importance of staying in Iskcon so Prabhupada can feel satisfaction and happiness. So real Iskcon is Prabhupada and Prabhupada's teaching. You know, we shouldn't take individuals or managerial decisions as Iskcon, because real Iskcon is Prabhupada's teaching, Prabhupada's books, and chanting the holy name.
Yes.
So if you give that up, that's foolish. So you should definitely stay in Iskcon and have ask for sure.
Yes, yes. And Prabhupada wanted individuality in Iskcon. He didn't want centralization. He wanted that everyone to their full capacity to serve Krishna according to their personalities. And that means you take the same philosophy and you incorporate it into your life. He said, what did he call it? Power politics. He used that expression. He didn't want power politics. He says if you try to control the devotees too much, with so many vouchers and everything centralized, it just becomes, democracy doesn't work in Iskcon, he said. No power politics. You just take the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya, and Prabhupada also made a rule. Anytime Iskcon is mentioned, founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Prabhupada also has to be mentioned, because he noticed that there were articles being written in newspapers and Prabhupada's name wasn't even mentioned. So he made that rule within Iskcon. Iskcon means Prabhupada. Prabhupada means his teachings.
Mother, as you were giving the example of Vara, he came out from the small and he expanded Iskcon.
Yes.
So we see the swan also is expanded and we are still cooperating. Prabhupada said we should cooperate. And
Yes.
we are still cooperating and we see the expansion how it is going.
Yes.
So we are also following the instruction of Prabhupada, whatever instruction he has given us. Just like he is following the instruction of his spiritual master, we are also following his spiritual master and we are trying to cooperate each other.
Yes.
Whatever there are up and downs, but still we cooperate and we stay.
Yes. That's right. That was Prabhupada who gave that example about Virahadev. Not me.
I just had a question on this comment. You know, we see some groups in America that have been very, very successful, but they're not officially with documents in Iskcon project. But even in the back of EBT books, it has their name listed, their temple listed. I don't know if you can follow me with Bell, but I can start over when it's finished, if need be. So in America, we have a few groups that are doing incredibly well that are not officially in Iskcon. They're Prabhupada disciples or disciples of Prabhupada disciples, many projects. And I've even heard a sannyasi mention, praise that option. So,
Who?
which sannyasi?
I mean, why bring it up?
Oh, because the reason why is because I'm wondering, does Prabhupada want us to stay officially in Iskcon? Or should we take the stance that Panchagoda Prabhu's view of Iskcon? So I'm just here bringing that up as, I don't know, and I'm just stirring the pot on this subject.
I hope you didn't I hope you didn't misunderstand my view.
Oh, okay.
This is why Prabhupada gave that example to Stephen Goldsmith, that you can take the Bhagavad-Gita and you can interpret it, misinterpret it, turn it upside down so many different ways. But you have to take it as it is. So Iskcon, is there any question whether this is an Iskcon temple? No. So why not play it safe? If you have the option of Prabhupada's Iskcon and maybe not, why take the chance in your spiritual life? Our life is so short. Why not just stay with Prabhupada's Iskcon? That'll make him happy. He never wanted these splinter groups.
I think also three elements of the success of Iskcon is cooperating in love and trust.
Yes.
Actually, in Prabhupada disciples. Otherwise, if we allow this mood of quarreling among ourselves and criticizing one another, and we are massaging Prabhupada,
Yeah.
we are beating him, and
Yes.
but if we cooperate with love and trust, I think it's a very successful formula.
You can keep that picture. That's why tonight at 7 o'clock, it'll be a pictorial 1-hour presentation. So you just keep that picture of Srila Prabhupada in your mind. And he says, cooperate. And then he starts to cry. I've given you this whole movement. Please maintain it. So you just keep that picture of Prabhupada here in Vrindavan and see whether you can cooperate or not, or whether you want to make Prabhupada cry. That's all.
Also, this issue of love and trust, it's a very deep issue. It's that love and trust doesn't mean only lip service. And we have to somehow rather see how to get realistic in this issue of love and trust with each other. Many people are getting older now. They need support from our society. We have to embrace them, not to let them die alone here and there. Many issues are popping up.
Yes.
So we have a lot of work to do.
Well, just as Srila Rupa Goswami, Prabhupada took the name of Iskcon from Rupa Goswami. Also Rupa Goswami, he teaches us how to love and trust amongst devotees with the six exchanges of love. So if we study Rupa Goswami's teachings as Prabhupada gave us in Upadeshamrita, then we can experience that love and trust amongst the devotees.
I used to remember seeing devotees there doing Harinam, and it was like 20 or 30 brahmacharis. This is like probably like 72, 73, and it was like a constant. It was like you used to see. And I remember a few years back, I was walking down that same road again, and I was like, God, where is all these devotees gone? How can we bring that life to them? And I'm also remembering, like the kirtans and Harinam led by, not me personally, but at the same time, Vishnu John Maharaj used to be one of these devotees. And it's saying, how do we bring that life? Of course, and now we have programs that are affiliated with Iskcon, and also for realization of Vishnu. We have a Christian bus program that's growing in South America, North America as well. But at the same time, it's like we have, where's that time going to come when we have like 20 to 30 brahmacharis or perhaps coming up and, the life again, like Vishnu, John Maharaj, life again, growth again. I was just like, is that time ever going to come again? Just thought it.
Once this incorporation was made, the devotees were able to use these incorporated papers to impress upon the police that their chanting and dancing in the street was according to the incorporation of the society. So in that way, Sankirtan, which is the real preaching tool of Iskcon, Sankirtan was able to spread all over America. But then when Prabhupada brought the devotees to India, he didn't have them do Sankirtan in the streets, because he understood that if the devotees went out in the streets, they were chanting and dancing and asking for donations, then the Indian people would think that they're just beggars like the other people in the streets. So according to time and circumstance, the preaching techniques are different. So why there's no Sankirtan in the cities now, you'd have to ask the temple president of that particular city,
That's how it was. That's open discussion. That's how it was. Even if you force upon somebody, somebody, people will come up and say, okay, just give me a sack on top. Just
yeah. Things were quite different in those days. All right. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Prabhupada ki jai.